They called me the mistake again. Not to my face, of course. They never said it outright. Not anymore. Now it's just coded glances, chuckles passed like napkins at the table, or that sudden silence when I walk into a room I was never meant to hear. But this time, the word slipped out, like it always does eventually. A cousin with a bit too much sangria. A conversation I wasn't supposed to be close enough to catch. And just like that, I was 17 again, sitting at the very edge of a table where no one remembered to set a place for me. But before I take you any further, don't forget to leave a like, comment where you're watching from, and click that subscribe button. It truly means the world and helps us keep telling stories like this. They say if you've ever been betrayed by family, hitting like brings peace, subscribing brings clarity, and commenting brings karma to those who wronged you. Try it, and tell me where you're watching from. Anyways, I hadn't planned on coming tonight. I almost didn't. My sister Harper sent the invite 2 weeks ago. Well, technically, her assistant did. A bland evite titled Family Dinner at the Old House Just Like Old Times, with a winking emoji that made my stomach twist. The old house? Their house now? The one I grew up in, but no longer belonged to. But I went. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was foolish. Maybe I thought deep down if I showed up as myself, as the woman I've quietly become, they might finally see me as something more than the third wheel that came too late to the party of their perfect lives. It was Harper who greeted me at the door, all polished in her linen jumpsuit, hair in that tight blonde bun that always made her look like she'd just walked off a magazine cover. Harper said, "Oh good, you made it," and hugged me like I was the distant aunt from out of town. Not her sister. Not the girl who once shared her twin bed after I had a nightmare. She didn't even look at me fully, just that quick, courteous glance, like she was already scanning for someone more interesting behind me. Inside, everything was glossy. Not like when we were kids. Back then, the floors creaked and the wallpaper peeled at the corners. Dad's recliner had a permanent lean. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and cinnamon. Now it smelled like sage and designer candles. "Can I take your coat?" Harper asked, already halfway to the closet. I said, "I'll hold on to it." And she just smiled faintly. The living room buzzed with laughter. Everyone looked more expensive than I remembered. My brother Simon was pouring wine at the sideboard, laughing with our cousin Michaela. He was in a tailored blazer, the kind that costs more than a month of rent used to for me. Michaela wore her usual over-the-top jewelry and spoke too loud, always needing a spotlight. She spotted me first. Michaela said, "Well, look who it is. The unicorn has arrived." I managed a half smile. "Hey, Michaela." Simon turned. "Wow, you actually came," Simon said, eyes flicking up and down like I was a project he didn't expect to be completed. "I was invited," I said. Simon said, "Technically, yeah." It was subtle, but sharp. The way all their comments are. I've learned to file them away, like paper cuts you only notice when they sting under hot water later. Dinner was served in the dining room, long table, gold-rimmed plates, perfectly folded napkins like origami swans. There was a place card for everyone, except me. Harper blinked. "Oh, I must have forgotten yours. No big deal, you can sit by the end." I sat at the corner, next to Great Aunt Joyce, who couldn't hear well and spent most of the meal complaining about the softness of the potatoes. As the courses went on, so did the stories. Harper recounted her trip to Capri. Simon boasted about his new consulting contract. Michaela gushed about her daughter's upcoming wedding, every sentence starting with, "You know how hard it is to get a venue these days." And me? I listened. I sipped water. I nodded when it was expected. Until dessert, when Michaela leaned over, fork poised above her lemon tart, and said, "You know, I ran into Aunt Meredith the other day." Simon said, "Oh God, how is she?" Michaela chuckled. "Dramatic as ever. She was telling me this old story about when your mom got pregnant with—" She paused, looked at me. Too late. "You," Michaela finished. "She said it was a miracle they even kept you." The room fell quiet for a second too long. Harper cleared her throat. "Well, you know we weren't planning for a third," Harper said, glancing toward Mom. "But we made it work." And just like that, it was there again. That word, unsaid but present. Mistake. My mother, who had been sipping wine, nodded absently. I always said 3 was too many. We were so close to being done, but life had other plans. Simon laughed softly. A surprise bonus round. They all smiled. I placed my fork down carefully. I didn't say a word. They kept talking, as if nothing happened. As if I hadn't just been reminded, again, that I was never supposed to exist in their perfect, curated life. I excused myself after the espresso came out. I told Harper I had an early morning, even though I didn't. She said, "Oh, already? Well, we're so glad you came." I walked myself to the front door. No one offered to walk me out. As I reached the entryway, I looked down the hallway, the one with the long, narrow walls and the light switch with the faint crack in the plastic. It used to be our measuring wall. Every few months, Mom would press a book to our heads and mark our heights with a sharp pencil. Simon in blue, Harper in pink. Me in black, always a little fainter. That wall was painted over now. Smooth beige. No trace of us left. But I remembered the spot where my last mark sat, 5 feet, 4 inches, made with shaky hands the week I left home at 18. I placed my fingers there now, quietly, just for a second. I wasn't the tallest, I wasn't the favorite, but I was still here. I stepped out into the night and closed the door behind me. As I reached my car, I heard laughter from inside, distant, warm, belonging, but not mine. And that was okay. At least, that's what I told myself as I drove away. The echo of that word, mistake, still ringing softly in the back of my mind. You don't realize you were the unwanted one right away. Not when you're a baby. Not even when you're 5 or 6 and start noticing your birthday presents are always wrapped in recycled paper, or your new clothes have tiny faded labels that used to belong to someone else. It hits slowly, a kind of quiet erosion. I was the 3rd child in a house designed for 2. Harper and Simon were the stars. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, born 2 years apart. Planned, prayed for, celebrated. I was 6 years behind Simon, born after my mom had already given away the baby crib, donated the toys, and painted the nursery into a home office. There are no ultrasound pictures of me in the family albums. Once, when I was around 7, I found a box of photos tucked away in the hallway cabinet, full of baby pictures, birthdays, first steps. Harper smiling with cake all over her face. Simon in a sailor costume at age 2. I looked for mine. I found one. A blurry shot of me as a newborn, lying on a couch cushion. No name written on the back, no first smile or baby's first Christmas. I showed it to Mom and asked, "Is this me?" My mother said, "Must be." You were always rolling around somewhere. She didn't take the picture from me, just walked away. The clothes I wore were hand-me-downs, always from Harper, never quite my size, never really mine. Christmas presents were usually shared, especially if it was something expensive. One year, Harper got a CD player. I unwrapped the box with her name on it and asked, "Is this for both of us?" Harper said, "No, but you can use it if you ask nicely." Mom said, "Don't be greedy. We can't buy 2 of everything." At school, I found little ways to stand out. I loved art. Drawing let me disappear, somewhere safe. Somewhere I wasn't the leftover kid in the wrong-sized sweater. In 5th grade, I won a small district contest. My art teacher was so proud she called home to share the news. I still remember watching from the kitchen table as my mom took the call, leaning against the fridge, smiling faintly. Then I heard her say, "Oh, that's nice. We're just trying to keep her out of trouble." That was all. Not, "She's talented." Not, "We're proud." Just trying to keep her out of trouble. When she hung up, I asked, "What did Mrs. Fairbanks say?" My mother said, "She said you drew something. That's sweet." I nodded. I didn't bring it up again. One afternoon, I was walking home from middle school and stopped near the garden gate. Dad was talking with our neighbor, Mr. Kenton, who had just come back from a vacation with his newborn grandson. Mr. Kenton said, "You've got your hands full with 3. My father laughed. "We only had room for 2, but life throws curveballs." They both chuckled. He didn't know I was listening. I never told him. But I carried those words for years, every time they forgot to pick me up from practice. Every time I had to wear Harper's old uniforms or sleep in the converted laundry room during summer visits. We only had room for 2. I left home the week I turned 18. There was no big fight. No screaming, just a quiet understanding that I wasn't expected to stay. Simon had already gone off to college. Harper was engaged and living in the city. My room had been turned into a guest room before I even got my acceptance letter to community college. I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and 1 grocery bag. Dad said, "So, where are you off to again?" I said, "Porter Hill." "Just a studio apartment near the bus route." My mother said, "Well, at least you're trying something." No one offered to help me move. No one checked if I had enough to eat. Harper sent me a thumbs-up emoji the next morning. That was it. I cried in the car, not because I was scared, but because I knew no one was going to notice I was gone. That first year alone was brutal. I had a mattress on the floor, a single lamp, and a mini fridge I bought off a kid from campus. I worked at a diner during the day and stocked shelves at night, studied when I could, slept when I couldn't. Sometimes, when I was too tired to cry, I'd sit by the tiny window and sketch houses. Not real ones, dream houses, warm ones, with messy walls, chipped mugs, and someone waiting on the porch. I used to draw my dream house over and over again. A little porch swing, cracked wooden stairs, yellow curtains in the kitchen, a place where I mattered. Not for what I could prove, not for who I was related to. Just for being me. One night, around 3 a.m., after a long shift cleaning grease off industrial pans, I sat on a bench outside the diner. My hands were blistered. My shoes had holes. I watched a woman in a crisp blazer step into a silver car that probably cost more than I'd make that whole year. And I thought to myself, I want a life that fits me, not one I have to squeeze into. Not a room in someone else's house, not a seat I had to earn, my own home, my own story. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself I would find it someday. And when I did, I'd never let anyone make me feel like an afterthought again. You don't grow grit from comfort. You earn it night after night when the only person cheering you on is the one in the mirror. Tired eyes, cracked lips, fingernails stained from cleaning chemicals, and no idea if any of it will amount to more than just another month scraping by. By 21, I had already lived in 5 different places, and for 3 weeks, my place was the back seat of a Honda Civic. It wasn't glamorous. I used a hoodie as a pillow. I'd park behind the 24-hour laundromat, where the lights stayed on all night, less for safety, more for the illusion that someone was watching, even if no one cared. I kept a gym membership just to shower. I'd smile at the girl at the counter like everything was fine. I got really good at pretending. Pretending I wasn't terrified. Pretending I wasn't furious. Pretending I didn't hear Simon's voice in my head from the last time we talked, saying, "You should have just married someone with a 401k. Or Harper's voice, "So, no degree yet? You know, you're not supposed to stay lost forever." They didn't ask how I was, just how far behind I still seemed. The real turning point came from a bottle of bleach and a $5 flyer. I had been doing odd jobs, cleaning apartments between tenants, babysitting, even briefly helping a dog walker who had too many golden retrievers and a bad knee. It wasn't enough. So I printed out 50 black and white flyers that read, "Reliable, affordable cleaning. Call Ava. No job too small, flexible rates." I taped them to every telephone pole in a 5-mile radius. The phone rang 4 times that week. The 5th call changed my life. Her name was Joyce Whitaker. An older woman, widow, needed someone to deep clean before her daughter's bridal shower. Her regular lady had broken her hip. She said, "You sound polite. Can you be here Tuesday morning?" I said, "I'll be early." Joyce had a 2-story brick home and a cat that didn't like me. But by the time I'd scrubbed every baseboard, polished the brass handles, and vacuumed under all her antique rugs, she looked at me like I'd just saved her life. Joyce said, "You've got hands like a worker bee and eyes like someone who's seen too much." I laughed and said, "Well, I have seen a lot of dirty ovens." She smiled and handed me an envelope, twice what we agreed on. Then she asked, "Do you want more work?" I said, "I want all of it." Joyce introduced me to her bridge friends, who passed my number along to their neighbors. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. Within 2 months, I was booked solid. My Civic was still my closet, but now it held a vacuum, gloves, microfiber cloths, and a binder with invoices I started handwriting in pencil. At night, I watched free videos on accounting and QuickBooks. I borrowed a library book on small business taxes. I downloaded a spreadsheet template and learned to track every dollar, what came in, what went out, what I needed to survive, and what I needed to grow. One client, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol, asked where I learned to clean like that. I said, "Trial and error." Carol said, "You ever thought about real estate?" I blinked. "I can't afford a house." Carol said, "No, I mean cleaning them. Listings, staging, agents always need last-minute miracles." She gave me 3 contacts. I called all of them that night. Only one answered. His name was Pete. He sounded tired. Pete said, "You come with your own supplies?" I said, "Yes." Pete said, "Can you make a foreclosure look like a model home in under 48 hours? I said, "Tell me where and when." He laughed, gave me an address, and said, "If I like it, you'll get more." I stayed up all night making a checklist. I showed up with a bucket in one hand and a mop in the other. The house was a mess. Old food in the sink, writing on the walls, cobwebs thick in the corners. I worked 14 hours straight. When Pete showed up, he blinked twice and said, "Holy hell. You did this alone?" I nodded. Pete said, "You free Friday?" I said, "I'll make myself free." That job turned into a contract. Then 2, then 5. By 24, I had a roster of clients, a basic business license, a new van with shelving, and an actual logo, just a butterfly with my initials, but it felt like mine. No one clapped. No one sent flowers. Simon texted once. Simon wrote, "So you're still scrubbing floors? Thought you'd be done by now." I wrote back, "I own the bucket now." He didn't reply. Harper invited me to her baby shower the same year. I almost didn't go. But I showed up, out of obligation, wearing a plain blue dress and carrying a neatly wrapped gift. Diapers and a hand-stitched onesie I stayed up sewing. She opened it, gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Ava, this is cute. Did you make this?" I said, "Yeah." Harper said, "Well, handmade is thoughtful." "I mean, not everyone has the time for Etsy." Simon snorted. Their friend, some girl in heels too high for the backyard lawn, whispered loud enough to hear, "Wait, isn't she like a cleaner or something?" Harper said, "Ava's always been creative. She's finding her niche." I smiled, nodded, and swallowed the bitterness. Then I drove straight to a client's condo and scrubbed their tile until my hands shook. I saved every penny I could. Every tip, every after-hours job, every refund from overestimating supplies. I lived on rice, canned beans, and whatever vegetables were on sale. I still drove the Civic, even when the windows stopped rolling down. Because I had a goal. Not just survival, not just to prove them wrong. I wanted something of my own, something that couldn't be taken or dismissed or repainted by someone else. One foggy Tuesday morning, I was driving back from a last-minute job. I turned down an old street out of habit, and there it was. A crooked, white-shuttered house with a swing on the porch and azaleas wilting in the garden. My grandmother's house. The one we used to visit when I was little. Before she passed. Before the family argued over who would inherit what. Before it got sold off quietly, none of them wanted it, not really. But I had loved that house. She used to sit with me on that swing and say, "Ava, don't ever let anyone tell you your place in the world. You build your own." I parked across the street and stared at it. There was a new sign on the lawn. For sale. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like a mistake. I felt like a beginning. No one gives you a key to the life you want. You either wait for someone to unlock the door for you, or you build the damn house yourself, brick by brick, quietly, while no one's looking. By the time I hit 28, I wasn't just cleaning homes anymore. I was studying them. I'd walk through properties with gloves on and bleach in hand, but in my mind, I was calculating square footage, imagining staging layouts, estimating what could be flipped and what needed to be gutted. Every client became a classroom, and I never wasted a lesson. One couple, Dana and Marjorie, owned 3 rental units. They liked me because I always showed up early and never complained about pet hair. One afternoon, I was scrubbing the grout in their kitchen when Dana leaned on the counter and said, "You ever think about getting into this side of things?" I said, "You mean like real estate?" Dana said, "No, I mean like ownership. Flipping. You've got the eyes for value and the stomach for hard work." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But that night, I stayed up reading everything I could on wholesaling, auctions, foreclosure buys. I watched webinars at 2 a.m. and filled notebooks with numbers and addresses and lender names. Then I opened a business account under Butterfly Rise LLC, named after the tiny sketch I used to draw in my notebooks during the hardest nights. It felt silly at first, pretentious, but that name became a shield. A blank face behind every transaction. No one needed to know it was me. My first property was a dump. 2-bedroom, termite damage, foundation issues. But the bones were strong. The wiring was newer. The neighborhood was up and coming. It cost me everything I'd saved for years, and then some. I maxed out a credit card just to cover the closing costs. My hands shook when I signed the papers. I cleaned it myself, ripped out the carpet, learned to tile from YouTube and patched drywall until my fingers bled. I brought in help when I couldn't do it alone, but I managed the entire project. I flipped it 6 months later for a $42,000 profit. I didn't tell anyone. I just did it again. And again. By 30, I owned 4 properties outright and held partnership stakes in 3 more. I didn't have a degree. I didn't have family backing. But I had keys, real ones, dozens of them. And each time I turned one in a lock, it felt like I was rewriting the story that had always been written about me. One cold November morning, I was walking through a familiar neighborhood. I had just finished a meeting with a staging company and took a detour on purpose. Elmwood Street, the place I used to bike up and down until the streetlights blinked on. The place where Harper had her first kiss behind the Jenkins hedges. Where Simon broke his arm trying to rollerblade down the sloped driveway. And where I used to sit under the oak tree across the street and draw the house with the red window boxes. Mrs. Elston's house. She'd passed away years ago. A neighbor waved me down when I paused out front. The neighbor said, "Are you interested in buying it? Her son's listing it. Place needs work, but the lot's good." I blinked. "It's for sale?" The neighbor said, "Yeah." Quiet listing, but it's on the market. I made a call that afternoon, not as Ava, the mistake child, not as someone's sister, but as the managing agent of Butterfly Rise LLC. No emotion, no story, just numbers. I bought it within the week. Cash deal, no competition. It was strange, walking through those halls again, this time with a clipboard instead of coloring books. The sunroom still had the faint smell of potpourri. The fireplace still creaked when I leaned against it. But it was mine now. The first of my childhood memories I had reclaimed. And it wouldn't be the last. About 6 months later, I received an unexpected email from a real estate attorney I'd worked with on my second flip. The subject line read, "Trust liquidation opportunity, high-value residential property." It was vague, like most deals passed quietly between professionals, but the attached file had a street name that made my stomach drop. Carrington Lane, my family's house. The one I'd left at 18. The one they'd remodeled and remodeled again. The one where they held every holiday dinner without me. It had been sold off. I clicked through the documents, trying to stay calm. The house had been placed into a holding trust several years ago, likely for tax reasons. Now, it was quietly being liquidated, probably because my parents had downsized to something smaller. Or maybe because Harper and Simon didn't want to keep it. There was no press release. No family group chat announcement. Just a number, a valuation, a transfer waiting to happen. I stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes. Then I stood up, walked across the room, poured myself a glass of water, and came back. And smiled. I submitted an anonymous offer, full price, no contingencies, through Butterfly Rise LLC. It would look like any other trust-to-corporate transaction. My name would never appear, only my company's. The seller's attorney accepted within 2 days. When the documents arrived for signature, I read them carefully. Not out of uncertainty, but reverence. Page 12 listed the full address. I ran my fingers over it. That hallway where the measuring marks once lived? That kitchen where Mom always turned her back while I set the table? The cracked patio stone where I once scraped my knee and bled alone? Mine. I signed the deed, not with joy, not with revenge, but with quiet satisfaction. Not because I needed to own it, but because they needed to believe it wasn't even possible. A few weeks later, I visited the house alone. No fanfare, no dramatic music. I parked where Dad used to park, let myself in with the new code, walked the halls slowly. Everything looked familiar, yet sterile, like it had been staged for someone else's life. The wallpaper was different. The furniture wasn't mine, but the bones hadn't changed. I stepped into my old bedroom. They had turned it into an office. Sleek desk, glass lamp, faux succulents. but the wall next to the closet still had the dent where I once threw a hairbrush during a fight with Harper. She said I was pathetic for crying over a boy. I said she'd never understand being invisible. She laughed. I screamed. Then I cried on the floor until Mom told me to keep it down because Simon was studying. I touched the dent now, traced it with my thumb. Still there. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence wrap around me. This was my house now. They didn't know it yet, but someday they would walk through that door and smile politely at the new owner. They'd sit at my table, sip drinks in my kitchen, and marvel at how well the place had been maintained. And I would nod. I would pour the wine. I would say, "I'm just glad it found the right hands." The first thing I noticed was the doormat. It said, "Welcome home, unless you're trouble." Harper's idea of humor. I wiped my shoes on it anyway. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, and once again I was stepping through the front door of the house I'd once been an afterthought in. Only now, they didn't know the house belonged to me. I had been here for 20 minutes, seated at the long dining table that had hosted decades of Thanksgivings and birthdays I barely got to taste. Harper had made a beet salad. Simon brought wine from a new sommelier he was mentoring. My mother had made her famous roast, though she now insisted it was gluten-free and cleaner than how she used to cook. Everything looked curated, posed, like a lifestyle blog no one asked to subscribe to. And then there was me. Sitting in the same seat as last time, far end near the patio doors, where the air leaks in through the unsealed edge. No name card again, no chair pulled out. Harper said, "Oh, Ava, can you get the bread from the kitchen?" Simon added, "You know where everything is." Of course I did. I nodded and stood up, walked past the buffet where the silver chafing dishes gleamed, through the hallway where the measuring wall once lived, now repainted a dull dove gray, into the kitchen where the tiles I had chosen with my own contractor were now covered in Harper's designer rugs. The bread was in the oven, slightly burnt. I brought it back with a cloth and set it down wordlessly. Simon said, "Still got the touch, huh?" I said, "I try." Conversation buzzed like it always did, circling around jobs, travel, investments. I let them talk. Harper said, "We were this close to buying a lake property, but with the market being what it is, plus managing this place, honestly, I told Mom and Dad we're lucky they didn't sell it out from under us." Simon said, "Seriously." "You should be grateful, Ava. If this house had gone on the market, you'd be priced out of your own childhood." Harper said, "Though I guess you're used to renting." They laughed. I looked down at my napkin, smoothed the corner, then I said it, calm, even. I said, "Funny, because I did sell it." They blinked. Harper said, "What?" I looked up and met her eyes. "I sold the house. Well, technically I bought it, from the trust, about a year ago." Simon said, No. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had brought just in case I lost my nerve, but I didn't lose it. I had waited for this moment too long. I placed the folder on the table, slid it across the polished wood, slow and deliberate. Inside, the deed. In the name of Butterfly Rise, LLC. The signature. My title as managing member. Every page notarized, dated, stamped. Harper opened it first. She scanned it, eyes darting, mouth slightly open. Harper said, This is some kind of joke." I said, "No, that's the legal deed. Your last holiday here was hosted by me. You've been sitting in my house." Simon leaned over, pulling the papers from Harper's hands. His face twisted in disbelief. Simon said, "What the hell is Butterfly Rise?" I said, "My company." "The one I started years ago." My mother, who had been sipping her wine quietly all evening, finally spoke. My mother said, "You're lying. Your father and I sold this house to an investment firm. We were told it was going to be used for short-term rentals." I nodded. That was the pitch. You were half right. Harper slammed her hand on the table. Harper said, "Why would you do this? Why wouldn't you tell us?" I said, "Because I didn't buy it for you. I bought it for me." Simon said, "Oh, come on, Ava." "This is petty." I said, "No. This is mine." The silence that followed was long and sharp. I could hear the wind rattle against the patio doors, the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of the fridge in the other room. Harper finally broke it. Harper said, "You always had a chip on your shoulder, and now you think owning this house makes you better than us?" I looked her square in the eye and said, "No. I don't think it makes me better. I think it finally makes me free." Simon scoffed. Simon said, "So what? You're just going to sit here like some villain in a soap opera? Let us eat in your castle while you twirl your mustache?" I almost laughed. I said, "You're still welcome here. Just understand, it's not yours anymore." My mother's hands were shaking. She pressed her napkin into her lap, folding it with trembling fingers. My mother said, "Why didn't you come to us? Why keep this secret?" I said, "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You never did." She looked at me, her eyes suddenly small. My mother said, "You always think you were left out, that we didn't love you." I said, "You didn't love me enough to see me." She flinched, quiet now. I stood up. I walked slowly down the hallway, letting my fingers brush against the newly painted walls. I passed the spot where the measuring marks used to be. I knew underneath that layer of paint, my last height line was still etched in faint pencil. It hadn't gone anywhere. They just didn't look for it. I reached the living room and turned back. They were still seated, stunned, papers still open, dinner forgotten. I said, "I wanted a home where I mattered." So I made one. And then I added softer, "That's what this is." For a long while, no one said anything. The house, their house, or so they thought, suddenly felt too quiet. Like the walls were listening. Like even the air was waiting for them to catch up. Harper was the first to speak again. Her voice was tighter now, smaller. Harper said, "We thought you were struggling." I didn't answer right away. I let her words settle in the space between us. That word, struggling, like it had been my entire personality, like they'd taken comfort in believing I would always be behind them. I said, "I was." For years, Simon leaned forward. His tone shifted, trying to recover ground. Simon said, "Then why the act? Why the mystery? You couldn't have just told us?" I raised an eyebrow. I said, "You mean, told the people who called me the mistake child? Who laughed when I said I was starting a cleaning business? Who joked about me renting forever?" Harper looked down at her plate. Her fork was still in her hand, frozen halfway to her mouth. Harper said, "We didn't mean it like that. We didn't mean it." I said, "You didn't mean for me to hear it," Simon muttered under his breath. Simon said, "God, you're still so dramatic." I looked at him. I said, "You think this is drama?" "Simon, I lived in my car. I ate canned beans for dinner 5 nights a week. And you were sending me articles about trade schools, like I was some lost dog you wanted to fix." Simon threw his napkin onto the table. Simon said, "I was trying to help." I said, "You were trying to fit me into a box you understood." My mother, who had been quiet until now, reached out with one hand. Her voice cracked when she spoke. My mother said, "Why didn't you tell us what you were doing, Ava? Why keep us out?" I stared at her. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, as if the truth had taken something out of her. I said, "You never asked." Her eyes filled. My mother said, "That's not fair." I said, "Isn't it?" I pulled out my chair and sat again, calmly. I wasn't here to explode or break things. I wasn't here to scream or seek revenge. I just wanted them to see me, really see me. I said, "You talked to each other. You posted photos. You sent Harper gift cards when she got promoted. You bragged about Simon's new job on Facebook. But me? I was the one you forgot to tag. The one who only got called when someone needed help moving." Harper whispered, "We didn't mean to make you feel that way." I said, "But you did." Over and over. Simon stood up. Simon said, "All right. I'm not doing this." He grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. Simon said, "You made your point. You own the house. You've got your secret business. Great, congratulations. What do you want from us now? Applause?" I said, "No." He turned to leave. I said, "I want space." Simon paused at the threshold. He looked over his shoulder, his face unreadable. Then he left. The front door clicked shut behind him like a punctuation mark. The silence that followed was softer. Just me, Harper, and Mom now. The dishes sat untouched. The roast had gone cold. A candle flickered on the buffet, its scent of bergamot oddly sweet against the weight of the room. Harper finally broke. Harper said, "I'm sorry." I turned to her. That wasn't a phrase I expected from her, ever. Her eyes were glassy, her shoulders stiff. Harper said, "I knew we treated you like the odd one out. I didn't know you carried it like that." I said, "I carried it because I had no one to hand it to." Harper said, "You were always the quiet one." I thought, maybe you like the distance. I laughed once, not cruelly, just softly. I said, "No one likes being forgotten." She blinked, then nodded. Harper said, "You were never a mistake, Ava. I'm sorry for ever making you feel that way." That one stung, in the best way. I didn't say thank you, not yet. It was too soon for that. But I did say, "Thank you for saying it." Then my mother spoke again. My mother said, "I didn't know you were hurting that much." I looked at her. I said, "Because you didn't look." She didn't try to deny it. She just closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked at me. Not as a child. Not as someone she had to handle or fix. But maybe, for the first time, as a woman. My mother said, "What do we do now?" I breathed in. Let the moment settle. I said, "You go home." She looked confused. I added gently, "Tonight, I want to be alone here, in my house." Harper didn't argue. She stood and picked up her coat. Harper said, "Will I see you again?" I said, "I hope so, but on my terms." She nodded and hugged me. A real hug this time, one without pretense. My mother lingered. Her lip trembled. My mother said, "I don't know how to make this right." I said, "You don't have to. You just have to tell the truth." She reached out and touched my arm, just once. Then she turned and followed Harper out. The door closed again, this time not with a click, but a hush. I walked through the house slowly. The dining table was still set, the wine half finished, the deed still sitting beside the floral centerpiece like a quiet witness. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and returned it to my bag. Then I turned out the lights one by one, moving through each room like a steward reclaiming her land. When I reached my old bedroom, the one they turned into a guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed. The window was still the same, slight draft in the corner. You could hear crickets through it if you sat still long enough. I sat there a long time, listening. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a homecoming. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission to stay. The next morning, the house was quiet in a way I had never heard before. Not silent, not hollow, just still. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything from you. The kind of quiet that says, you're allowed to breathe now. Sunlight poured through the curtains of my old bedroom, now mine again, fully and truly. Not the guest room, not a borrowed space, not a museum of someone else's past. Mine. The bedspread had changed over the years, now a minimalist cream with embroidered corners. But the bones of the room were the same. Same slanted ceiling, same dusty corner where I used to stick glow-in-the-dark stars. I sat on the floor by the closet, barefoot, sipping lukewarm tea from a chipped mug I'd found in the kitchen. And I thought about all the versions of myself who had sat in this room before. The girl who drew houses in the margins of her notebook. The teenager who cried after overhearing her parents call her unexpected. The young woman who packed her things and left this house like she was escaping a fire, when in truth, she was walking out of smoke and shadows. And now, me, still here. But whole. I stood and walked down the hallway. No lights on, just the sound of my own soft steps over hardwood. I stopped where the measuring wall used to be, right between the hallway mirror and the old coat closet. They'd painted it over, of course, smooth eggshell white now. No hint of the lives once charted here. But I remembered that Harper's lines were marked in pink, Simon's in navy. And mine, last and faintest, were done in dull black pencil after everyone else had gone back to the living room. They'd stopped measuring me after a while. Said it didn't matter anymore. But I remembered where that final line was. 5 feet, 4 inches, age 17. I took a pencil from the drawer in the sideboard and knelt down slowly. I marked a line, then another, and another, not perfect, not exact, just from memory, but each one was mine. Harper, age 12, Simon, age 10, Ava, age 17. I underlined my own mark, just once. Then I stood back. I didn't cry. Not this time. That afternoon, I heard the mailbox flap snap shut. I stepped outside, barefoot, still in pajama pants, and opened the box. Bills, a landscaping flyer, and one envelope with my name, handwritten in neat script. No return address, no label, just Ava, written in ink I recognized. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick, ivory-colored, folded once. It was from Harper. It read, "I see you now. I'm sorry it took this long. H." That was all. No explanations. No ask for forgiveness. No expectations. Just 7 words that I folded slowly and placed inside the same drawer where I kept the deed. I didn't write back, but I kept the letter. Later that evening, I stood on the front porch with the watering can, something I hadn't done since I was a child helping Grandma. The planters were blooming with petunias, the breeze was warm, the sunset hit the shutters in gold and rose. I tipped the watering can into the soil slowly, watching the earth drink. Across the street, a couple walked their dog. A neighbor waved. I waved back. For a moment, I imagined them wondering who lived here now. Not that strange girl from years ago. Not the one who always stood in her sibling's shadow. Someone else. Someone who had built her life from the ground up. I looked out over the lawn, the fence, the swing that still creaked when the wind nudged it. And I said, to no one in particular, maybe to the ghosts of my own past, they called me a mistake. But this house, this life, it was no accident. Then I set the watering can down and went back inside. Home, at last. Forever. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It means more than you know. And wherever you are, have a blessed day.